If you want to run your AI agents on a schedule or predetermined interval, setting this up in Agentuity is super easy. It takes just a single step in the UI and a single line of code for you to get all set up. So in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to get started using a cron job with your AI agents. Now, in our tutorial series so far, we've looked at a few different examples of AI agents, like a GitHub triage agent and a documentation expert that can use the different storage types that we have built in. And while you hopefully found these interesting and informative, to actually run these agents, we have to be involved and either create an issue on GitHub or upload some documentation and ask some questions for the agent to actually spin up and do something interesting for us. So that means we've been working with reactive agents so far. And of course, the next logical step would be to schedule an agent so that it can automatically get started and do something cool for us. And that's what we're going to look at today. So the example that we're going to do is just grabbing the top 5 news stories from Hacker News. And then we're just going to create a news digest out of this and store this in a KV store on Agentuity. So to get started, we'll head over to the UI where we'll add this new cron job. And right now I've got it set up to run every 5 minutes just for demo purposes. And you can change the content type and the payload as well if you need to do that. But for us, we're going to keep things simple. And as a side note, if you're not too familiar with cron expressions, there's a couple good resources out there, including this one from Google Cloud. And it kind of shows you the different fields and what all of them mean. Another cool resource is crontab.guru, which provides a nice way to check if your cron schedule expressions are actually valid or not. And of course, you can play around with randomizing them if you want to learn more about what these different fields mean. But for us, we're just going to keep things simple and use this expression to run the agent every 5 minutes. So again, what that means is it's going to grab the top 5 stories from Hacker News and it'll create a digest for us. So let's take a look at the code to see exactly what this agent is going to do once we schedule it to run on its own. So the first thing you'll see in this project is this Zod schema that we have here. And now Zod is just a way to validate incoming data, in this case, the news that we get from Hacker News. And we can set up this schema with fields that we expect to get back just to make sure that the data that we're getting is all validated at runtime. And you might have seen Zod in a couple different examples on Agentuity, so just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then we also have a digest data schema with some fields that we're going to want to use, like the timestamp of the article. From there, we're just going to grab the top stories and the item or each story, and then we're going to go ahead and fetch those top stories in this function right here. So again, we're just going to validate that incoming data using Zod, and then gather all of these stories. Now for the overall run function, or this AI news digest function, here's where we set up the cron job. So we'll have a request.trigger equals cron, which is how we're going to actually set things up so that our agent in Agentuity knows to use that cron job and run every 5 minutes in this case. So we're just going to call that fetch top stories helper function. And just in case that doesn't work, I've got some fallback articles. From there, we're just going to go ahead and generate a summary for the digest. So we're just going to use GPT-5 Nano to do this. And it'll create a simple 2 to 3 sentence summary, and we'll just keep it under 300 words. And again, we'll use Zod to validate the digest data with all of the fields that we set earlier. To keep track of things, we're just going to use a KV store called digest with a latest key, and we'll send it that data. So if we wanted to run our agent on a schedule and set up a cron job, that's all it takes. It's really as easy as that. But of course, when you're testing things out and just making sure that your logic is sound, you probably don't want to wait until that agent is scheduled and actually runs to make sure that everything works correctly. Or you might not want to set up your agent to run every 5 minutes or so, which will create a bunch of logs and more importantly will cost you if you're making LLM calls. So that's where Agentuity's DevMode is super interesting. So here we can also set up a manual trigger, which is how we would test things out in DevMode. So again, being able to do those 2 different things, run a cron job, but then also test manually is super easy, and it just takes this one line. But from there, we're just going to see if the commands that we've set in the welcome function back up here to test if our fetch is working, and then show our eventual digest. Those are going to be the things that we look for and that we have logic for down here. So when it's a test fetch, we'll just grab the top 3 stories and then just log that test and see if we can get some data back, just to make sure that the main part of our agent logic is actually working. And then the other command that I have set up for testing is just showing the digest. So if we've got something stored in that digest KV store, we'll go ahead and get that data. And then we'll go ahead and just return that data and then also have some information about when the next update is going to be. So that's pretty much the code. And let's go ahead and actually test this out first in dev mode just to see how that works, and then see if our agent can run by itself on this predetermined schedule. So when we launch dev mode and we run this test fetch command, we'll be able to see the top 3 stories on Hacker News for today, with a very interesting third story there. But now that we know this works, let's go ahead and set up our cron job to actually run every 5 minutes. So I'm just going to go ahead and re-enable this. And I just had it disabled to make sure that I'm not actually running this agent every 5 minutes, but we'll go ahead and save that and enable it. And then we can see if the agent can actually go and grab all 5 stories and actually create a summary using GPT-5 Nano. So if we check back on our agent in the logs, we can see that it fetched the top 5 stories from Hacker News and it created the digest for us. So let's go ahead and take a look at the KV store and see what it created. So over in our key value storage called digest, we have a latest AI summary, and it has those sources and a simple summary of the top 5 sources. So we know that that worked correctly, but let's go ahead and test out the other command that we had set up in dev mode. So if we go back and ask it to show us the digest, we should see a nice report pop up here. And there we go, we get a nice tech digest with a nice summary of all the different sources that we pulled from Hacker News. Again, there's some interesting ones here, like that third headline there. But in general, and to summarize, I hope this example shows you how you can set up a cron job to run your agents on a schedule instead of always manually sending a trigger or invoking them in some other way. And of course, there's a lot of exciting use cases, and you can do a lot of really cool things when you set up your agents to run on a schedule or an interval. So definitely let us know the projects that you're creating with a cron job on Agentuity. But until then, thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.